Shivangi, we are live.
Yes, sir. So, hey, good morning, everyone. Today we have with us Mr. Tejasvi, who is the Senior Vice President at PSC Bank. He's a data practitioner and consultant assisting Fortune 500 firms. He helps to build and optimize data models. Yes, he helps to build, optimize data management and governance solutions. He provides a wide range of services, including data strategy, risk management, app service rationalization, digital transformation, and project excellence. He also currently heads the data management and governance operations of a major financial institution. His experience comes from many areas of work, including consumer banking, commercial banking, and capital markets of healthcare. It's a pleasure to have you here, sir. I would now like you to lead the session. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thanks Shivangi for the introduction. And thanks Nikhil.
Thank you
for
very
having me
much,
here.
Tejasvi sir, for accepting our invitation and joining this forum and guiding our audience. Thank you very much and welcome to you, sir.
Yeah, the pleasure is mine. You guys can go on mute because I'm hearing a echo. And to start with, I think it's a pleasure to be able to represent the forum in terms of having to share my thoughts around data privacy and data security on a multi-cloud environment. And at the outset, me and Nikhil have been discussing extensively on this topic, and the forthcomings and the shortfalls, the organizations and the industry is in fact looking at, and certain capabilities which in fact can, plug these gaps or enable the organization to be able to say that, the customer's data is rightly protected and there is trust being built with the customers. So at the outset, I'll be sharing my screen. And what we are seeing on the screen is in fact called a data trust framework. It takes into account the privacy as well as the security and the data governance as well as the corporate governance aspects of having to manage data, making it trustworthy for the customers who are perhaps stakeholders in this larger stake of business, and including the external stakeholders who can be shareholders, because trust in fact needs to be cascaded between employees, customers, as well as shareholders. And this is what will actually result in a harmonious contribution of data and privacy and security to be able to create the trust within all these stakeholders. So at the outset, in simple sense, what I want to say is that we can't just ring fence data trust or data privacy or data security as a science to just people within the organization or to customers alone. It in fact gets cascaded to shareholders, and that's when the trust, when it gets cascaded to the shareholders, will result in further investments coming into the organization, because the society believes that there is a socio-economic cause which is being taken seriously by an organization, and that's when it becomes a win-win for the society as well as the company that operates in that society. So that's a high-level principle with which the data trust framework has been put in place. And at the outset, what we are seeing is towards the left, on the vertical axis, the common tenets of people, process, and technology, along with one more dimension of processes and controllers, who in fact are major enablers, who process data, who provide data, and who consume data to be able to assist the organization And towards the top on the horizontal axis, we can look at certain aspects like policy, procedures, data ethics, ESG, and then data governance as a major tenet, and privacy management, which in fact includes a part of privacy technology as well as security technology in terms of data. And then there is third-party management, which can be related to contract management with the vendors or with the joint controllers or even with the processors. And there is an important aspect of records management, which need not just be around document management, but it can also be around centrally managing the documents associated with the processing of the data, and as well as the relationships and how the relationships are spanning out, and what are certain related aspects that can qualify these relationships. And while this is called the data trust framework, there has been a recent survey with the C-suite and the CIOs, as well as artificial intelligence practitioners across the world. And this survey was specifically aimed at having to understand how are these personnel in these organizations taking up digital transformation with cloud-based capabilities. And at least 68% of these personnel who in fact have been questioned on the survey have put it straight away that 68% of this particular number looks at cloud technology to store and process most of their data, which is a significant number in fact. And there is one more survey which was done on the C-level of organizations across the globe again, specifically which asks a question, will you or are you moving over to the cloud for storage and processing capabilities of data? And specifically, what would you want to have as a serving layer on the cloud? So to the first question, 9 of 10 practitioners, as well as C-suite, believe that in the next 2 years, 9 of 10, in fact, believe that they're going to be on the cloud for data storage. And to the second question, their response was they would want to move onto the cloud to be able to digitally serve the customers, and as well as to be able to optimize on their costs and infrastructure management. And they also believe that they can intelligently use certain newer age capabilities like artificial intelligence or machine learning to be able to drive certain strategic insights for the organizations. Now it's good that we are seeing multiple cloud capabilities with the hyperscalers like Microsoft or Amazon or Google or Oracle coming up with these offerings, which in fact are best in the market, which are taking organizations forward in terms of realizing their strategic decisions with technology. But however, can we ask a question like, is data privacy and data security moving at the same pace that infrastructure on the cloud or processing capabilities of data on the cloud are evolving? Now, to that question, most of you might answer this question specifically based on a geography. Like we can safely say that certain geographies like Europe or California or even India, which is coming up with its new bill on data privacy, are thinking towards having to have certain guidance provided by the governments to be able to protect data that's going on to the cloud, to have certain guardrails around perhaps localizing data onto the clouds or having to protect the network with certain controls or perimeters, which in fact is going to give that confidence to the customers as well as these societies which they operate in, saying that they're well protected on having to share or invest their information with these organizations. While regulatory compliance is evolving, there still might be certain catching up to do, in the sense that the pace at which technology is evolving is very high. But the question is the guidance that is being evolved in the form of policy, be it a public policy or be it an internal policy, is it evolving at the same pace? Now we are getting to a conclusion that data is burgeoning, it's evolving with an exponential growth in most of the organizations. That's primarily because today we are able to capture information at a larger pace, and we have the technology to capture most of the information that is being generated by digital footprints that's being, in fact, being provided by customers who are interested in services. And with this exponential growth of data also comes the challenge of how do we discover the data that is being curated or coming into the control environment of an organization. And that's when classifications for privacy and security come into play. The first step, which in fact I would advise, is that it's good to have a classification schema or a framework that in fact says that which is the data, like a phone number or an email or a Aadhaar or an SSN, that directly identifies a customer, or which is that data which can be only a middle name in combination with, let's say, a first name or a last name, when combined together can potentially identify a customer, and which are direct identification data, which are not direct identification but indirectly can relate to customer. And it helps if you can have a classification specifically for employees, and that's what I do. And such classification schema, apart from what is defined by the regulation, like a GDPR or a CCPA or the upcoming DPB, or even the IT Act of 2011 or the SPDI Act of 2011, which clearly state that we need to have a classification which is personal data and sensitive personal data. Now, what is personal data and sensitive personal data within the schema of classification depends on the geographies in which the organization operates in. So, for example, GDPR and the European organizations need not classify financial information like account information or transactions as sensitive personal data or even personal data. But however, in India, the SPDA Act clearly states that the financial information will have to be classified as sensitive personal data. So most of these classification schemas, which are used to identify and classify the data, which is exponentially increasing from the channels, will have to have certain intelligence to the way that they classify data based on the geography in which it's pertaining to. And one other aspect which I would want to highlight is that historically organizations have grown either through mergers or acquisitions, or they might have grown organically, but most of them have been embracing distributed culture in terms of investing into technology in a distributed way. For a business division like marketing, or a function like marketing, or let's say a function like sales would have its own data office, its own technology office, and they were operating with a specific purpose of having to maximize on these capabilities to be able to market well, to be able to convert more leads into customers, to be able to send out regulatory communication on their servicing, perhaps. And the data security guardrails, which were supposed to be there, were mostly decentralized as well, with perhaps a central guidance being provided by a CISO. Now, I think the first challenge we are looking at, perhaps in most global organizations, is given this distributed culture of having to invest into IT, people, and process in a decentralized way, resulting in the guardrails of data security or data privacy also being siloed, and decisions being given to the business or the functions who are investing into these technologies. And however, the pace at which the privacy office or the security office needs to put in certain directions, assessment, and monitoring on these enablers within business divisions or functions might not be at the same pace at which they're expecting it to be. In the sense that while we are highlighting the challenges, we are not going to the solution right away. We can try to solution it in the sense that what is the right way of having to perhaps put a central policy which provides direction in terms of what needs to be achieved as a control environment within a multi-cloud setup to be able to protect customer data from being out there on the public web or the dark web. So this being a value statement can be achieved by a policy and certain procedures which can still be decentralized or centralized, because what really a business division or a function might be looking up to is what are certain steps that need to be taken, like privacy classification into personal data and sensitive personal data. What is the next step to data security after that? Is it having to employ an encryption or an anonymization or a masking to be able to ensure that there are data security controls in place when data is going on to a multi-cloud setup? And then comes in certain questions on technology, be it privacy or security technology, in terms of how nimble is it for us to manage the keys for encryption centrally in a nimble way without having to be siloed on each of the cloud setups. And I think, I just don't want to solution for it right away, but I'm giving you the challenges which, I have been hearing from the industry. And further to that, this complexity in terms of the landscapes in a global environment or in a global organization would require certain simplicity in terms of having to manage data privacy and security. And this being complexity being the third challenge. So the three challenges we talked about are the exponential growth of data and the pace at which the direction from a central privacy office or a security office is matching the pace of growth of data and growth of technology. And the second challenge being most of the investments being distributed and siloed-based technological advancements into these businesses, and also the siloed direction that is being taken by these divisions and functions. And the third challenge which we spoke about is basically about the complexity of these landscapes and having to simplify it to be able to apply data security and privacy controls in a more logical way. Now, having talked about these challenges, we also talked about one of the solution capability, which is a classification schema for privacy. It can be a schema that's based on a direct, indirect, or non-identifying customer based classification, along with an employee classification for data, And it can also be something around a geographical specific classification, like a personal data and a sensitive personal data. Now, having talked about classifications, it's imperative that we would require technology to be able to classify this data in an automated way based on the geography again. Now, there are certain solutions like cataloging and data discovery features in the data governance toolsets, which can provide these specific classification capabilities in an automated way. It can be as simple as having to connect a database like an Oracle through an ODBC or a JDBC. And this particular classification tool or a technology will be able to sift through the schemas, the structures of the tables and the columns, and will further understand, based on perhaps a regex expression, if a particular data element is an SSN or an Aadhaar number, or is it a phone number or an address or a city. Now, how do they do that is, as I specified earlier, it can be based on the format of the data element. Like, for example, if PAN number is 10-digit long and it has a specific format, like the first 5 digits should be alphabets. And the next is a digit, and next comes in alphabet again. So based on this specific format, which is coded into perhaps a regex expression, is used as a data rule across the entire database, metadata, in fact. And once the tool is able to find a particular data element which matches the format of a PAN number, it will be able to classify it as a PAN number. But there comes a question on, now there can be other data elements, like a principal outstanding balance or something like a loan balance. Now, how do we define how loan balance in format differs from principal outstanding balance? Because both of them are to be classified as sensitive personal data. Now, in this particular case, technology might not still be the one-stop shop. While it can help with a format-based check or a reference data-based check, but there is still a human aspect to having to identify what is a principal outstanding
Excuse me, sir, you're currently inaudible. Hello, sir, can you hear me?
Shivangi, I can hear you. Just a minute. Let me check this.
Yes, sir.
Don't worry, the speaker is rejoining and we'll get the issue fixed. Okay.
Perfect, sir, thank you.
Shivangi, if you can check, sir is trying to join. Are you getting any request?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Sir, you are accepted.
Okay.
Shivangi, make me also a host, please.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry for the glitch.
No problem.
Let me share it once again. Can you make me a host, Shivangi?
Sir, Nikhil sir has the voice.
Yeah, I've made you a co-host. You can share it.
I think I'm not able to share it. Can you try giving it again?
Within the co-host. Yes, sir, you, so you now have the co-host, right?
Shivangi, make me also co-host. Don't make me host.
Yes, sir.
Sir, are you able to share it now? Yes, your
Yeah.
screen is visible.
Okay, so in fact, what I was talking about is zero knowledge encryption, which is getting widely accepted for enhancing the security control environment within an organization that is on a multi-cloud setup, which actually means that none of the service providers, be it the cloud providers, not the third-party agents which provide key management services, they'll have to know nothing about the data that is being stored on the database servers. And they're completely abstracted from having to know about what are the keys, how many keys are getting generated, what is the encryption methodology. And this is perhaps one of the trends which we have been seeing for the past 1 year. And I was speaking to a data security practitioner and an enterprise architect with one of the major global banks. And we combinedly understand that there are 4 aspects which organizations can benefit from. The first aspect is, in fact, visibility of the encryption keys. So we know that the cloud service providers, though they provide, though they seem like they're providing the control of the key management services to the organization, it can still be a shared HSM and a shared service. Perhaps while some organizations are moving towards a dedicated HSM, but visibility of the encryption keys is something that most of the industry practitioners are stressing on. They're not just looking for access to the key management services and internal privileges, but it's more about having complete control on the keys and the key management services. And the next aspect is the risk of data loss. Now, when do we tend to have a data loss is when we go through a data breach. And when is a data breach imminent is when the keys are lost. Now, the keys can be lost on purpose internally, or they can be stolen. Now, this can be a result of insufficient authorization control or ineffective disaster recovery services for the key management. And once the keys are lost, either intentionally or accidentally, this will definitely result in a risk of data loss. While I would stress on having stronger authorization controls and stronger disaster recovery controls, even for the key management and the keys, which can prevent data loss intentionally or accidentally, I would still insist on having this feature on a multi-cloud setup. While we might still be going with certain vendors or agents who will be able to manage the keys and generate the keys with zero knowledge encryption. And one of the aspects when we invest into multi-cloud is a vendor lock-in as an aspect that predominantly comes up. Nikhil, can you go on mute? Nikhil or Shivangi?
Yes, sir, Brahma.
Okay, so with vendor lock-in, what happens is that we might have to embrace the key management services of that particular cloud service provider, but we don't want to lock in with a specific vendor, because today I perhaps would want to take up a serving layer on an Azure with my Kubernetes and the source landscape running on a microservice architecture on AWS, while the APIs and the integration framework runs on a GCP. Now, what becomes more challenging is having to share the keys between multi-cloud providers and having a vendor lock-in on the key management services. So definitely not having a vendor lock-in and being able to not being confined to a specific key management service is something that will give that nimbleness. And the next aspect is key lifecycle management. So the cloud service providers will have their key management services that manages the key through acquisition or creation till retention or deletion. And this is an important aspect which might be short seen from the cloud service providers, but having certain capabilities of automating the life cycle of the keys will be a better capability.
So you're inaudible again. Sir, can you hear me? Sir, you're inaudible.
Yeah, hi Shivangi, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I
About
think
the
I have closed the session. So in fact, I think I was summarizing it by saying what we discussed. At the outset, we discussed about privacy classification standards, which can be direct, indirect, employee classification standard, and then the geographical specific standards about personal data and sensitive personal data. And having those technology capabilities and catalog, which can automate classification of data for privacy, even before we get to transfer this data onto a multi-cloud setup or a single cloud setup. And further, we talked about certain regulations like GDPR, CCPA, as well as the upcoming DPP in India. Then the various security controls that can be applied for data at rest, data in motion. We did not speak about data in usage. We can put it aside for another session. And then certain enablers which in a multi-cloud setup we are looking for, which can be visibility of the encryption keys, the risk of data loss associated with the risk of losing the keys with a inadequate DR setup or an authorization control, which might be lacking. And then the vendor lock-in when it comes to having to service data or process and store data on multiple clouds. Then key lifecycle management, and having that automation capabilities to be able to centrally manage the lifecycle of the keys, which can be acquisition of the keys in a multi-cloud setup or creation in one single setup, and the retention as well as the archival or the destruction of the keys. And we talked about data in motion and the security controls related to data in motion and the choices of encryption or anonymization or masking that need to be applied for personal data as it is being transferred between in the network between data centers, be it on-premise or between other data centers of the cloud. And the other technology capabilities and advancements which might be able to do all of this, including encryption, anonymization, de-anonymization, masking, at a pace of which we wouldn't have to introduce a lag while processing data. So at the outset, I think that's a summary of what we discussed in the past 40 minutes. I think in between, you were not able to hear me in and out, but I hope I was able to summarize all of this. Shivangi?
Yes, sir. Since there are no queries, we believe the session was self-explanatory. It was a pleasure having you here with us, sir.
Yeah, the pleasure is mine as well. I hope I have been able to give certain nudges as a data protection officer and within the realms of data management and governance as well in a multi-cloud setup. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. And if you want to know further, there is a recent publication, Data Risk Management, which provides ready frameworks as well as a risk and a control inventory that can be embraced by you. It's in the form of a book that I published through Blue Rose. It's available on Amazon as well. Please get a copy for yourself. If you have any questions, do shoot them out to me and I'll be able to answer them back. With that, we can close the session.
Yes, sir. Just one more request. Could you please share your LinkedIn as so the people who couldn't join us here could connect with you?
Yeah, sure. Let me quickly. Yeah, this is my LinkedIn profile. You can find me with Tejasvi Adagada. This was the book I was talking about, Data Risk Management. You can drop me a note on LinkedIn. I'll be able to respond back to you in a day or two.
Perfect, sir. Thank you so much for Yes, sir. I will be adding.
Okay. Thanks, then. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you everyone for being here with us.